The difference between Christianity and Islam is that Muhammad is mentioned in the Bible by name Muhammadim, Hebrew, in the Old Testament, and by proxy name Paraclete in the New Testament. Yet Christians and Jews reject Nabi Mustafa as the fulfillment of the Muhammadim prophecy, while Muslims do not. The Old Testament says, quote, "His mouth is sweetness itself. He is altogether lovely. This is my beloved." Hebrew transliteration, Muhammadim. "This is my friend, daughters of Jerusalem." This verse is from the Aleppo Codex, considered one of the most canonical codexes of the Old Testament. It's also in the Leningrad Codex. In Hebrew, Muhammad, Muhammadim. In Arabic, Muhammad, Muhammadin. To counter this naming of Muhammadim in the old codexes of the Bible, Christians turn to four main schools of argumentation. Number one, the Son of God theology. The Son of God requires a video on itself because it's a very major and problematic theology. In short, the Son of God theology, which Jesus never claims in the Bible, creates two major problems. Number one, it cuts the lineage of prophets by raising Jesus above every other prophet. Number two, the Son of God theology rejects any potential prophecy beyond Jesus in the future by making an argument kind of like it doesn't matter if there is a prophecy of Muhammadim in the Old Testament or not, Jesus is still the Son of God. Number two, Christians can try to discredit the Old Testament in various different ways. One way is to claim that the Aleppo Codex has fabricated the Muhammadim text. Well, if you disbelieve in the Aleppo Codex, you also disbelieve in the Leningrad Codex because all of them say Muhammadim, and then you basically disbelieve in a large portion of the Old Testament. Another way is to use the New Testament as the Furqan of the Old Testament, meaning we are going to look at the Old Testament from the New Testament perspective. If it rejects the New Testament, we reject it. Sure, you can do that, but then you need the correct version of the New Testament, which you cannot prove which version is the correct gospel. Number two, Jesus in the New Testament actually prophesies someone to come after him, a paraclete in the Greek version. For example, Jesus says, "But very truly I tell you, it is for your good that I go away. Unless I go away, the advocate, Paraclete, will not come to you. But if I go, I'll send him to you." In the versions of the New Testament we have today, Jesus clearly prophesies that someone will come after him, named as the Paraclete, translated advocate or comforter. But you can also translate it as praiseworthy one, or someone who praises, which is Ahmed, a derivative of Muhammad in Arabic. In either way, doesn't matter if you look at Old Testament or New Testament, Muhammadim or Paraclete, there is a high probability that the Bible contains a prophecy of a future person coming. Then Christians usually do number three and number four, naming or add own interpretation. They change the name from Muhammadim to beloved. Yes, Muslims agree that Muhammad is Habibullah, beloved of Allah, but Muhammadim can be a name. They start disassociating Paraclete in Greek from praiseworthiness or anything related to praise, because that can be Ahmed or Muhammad. Let's say it's advocate instead. And let's change all the schoolings and translations to mean advocate or comforter. This is an old Greek trick even done against ancient Egypt to use naming alchemy. Whatever names they want to change, we still have Muhammadim in Hebrew. And finally, number four. Typically Christian, they start adding their own interpretation to it. Jesus doesn't say that, Muhammadim doesn't mean that, it's another context. My answer to that is, when people add their own interpretation to scripture, that also happens in Islam. There's not much we can do. I mean, you can straw man argue and you can pick and choose verses to suit your own narrative. But sincere seekers of the truth cannot rule out the possibility that Muhammadim may be a prophecy.